A gold mine worth $6 billion once existed only as rock that had been dusted by hand with gold bought from villagers. It sat in the jungle of Borneo, and for a while the whole financial world believed it was the richest gold strike ever found. The company was called Bre-X, and it started as a stock you could buy for pennies. At its peak, a single share cost $286.50. About 40,000 people put their savings into it. Pension funds that managed the retirements of teachers and city workers bought in by the hundreds of millions. And then a man fell out of a helicopter into the trees, and the whole thing came apart. I'm Sterling, and I read balance sheets so you don't have to lose your shirt on the ones that lie. This is the story of the biggest mining fraud ever recorded. It is a story about how a number can grow just because everyone wants it to. Nobody ever found the gold because there was almost none to find. Let me show you how a jungle full of ordinary rock became worth more than most countries' gold reserves. Our story starts with a man named David Walsh who founded Bre-X in Calgary, Canada. By the early 1990s, Walsh was broke, running a tiny mining company out of his basement. He had, at one point, filed for personal bankruptcy. So he did what desperate promoters do, which is go looking for one last big idea. In March of 1993, Bre-X bought the rights to a patch of jungle called Busang in East Kalimantan, Indonesia. To find gold there, Walsh hired a Filipino geologist named Michael de Guzman. De Guzman was charming, deeply in debt, and running more than one family at the same time. He told people that the exact spot to drill had come to him in a dream. That should have been the first clue, because gold does not usually announce itself in your sleep. But in mining, a good story is worth almost as much as good rock. De Guzman ran the sampling, which means he controlled the very evidence the whole company depended on. When you drill for gold, you pull up long cylinders of rock called core samples. You crush them, you assay them, and the assay tells you how many grams of gold sit in each ton of stone. Whoever handles those samples between the drill and the lab holds the truth in their hands. De Guzman held it, and he decided to improve on it. Here is the plain fact under all the drama, which is that the gold in Bre-X's samples was real, but it never came from the ground. De Guzman bought alluvial gold, the fine dust that local miners pan out of rivers. Over roughly 2.5 years, he spent an estimated $61,000 buying that panned gold from villagers. Then he shaved it, sprinkled it, and stirred it into the crushed rock before it went to the lab. This trick is old enough to have its own name, and that name is salting. He was careful, using believable ratios of gold to stone, so no single sample looked absurd. The labs, testing exactly what they were handed, reported real gold over and over. And so the estimate of how much gold Busang held began to climb. In 1995, the early guess was around 2 million ounces. Later that year, the number was revised to about 30 million ounces. In 1996, it was revised again to roughly 60 million ounces. By early 1997, the official figure was near 70 million ounces. And de Guzman's colleague, chief geologist John Felderhoff, told people it might reach 200 million ounces. Sit with that last number for a moment. 200 million ounces would have been a meaningful slice of all the gold in the world. Notice that the deposit never got richer because anyone found more gold. It got richer because the story needed it to, and nobody could check the samples independently. That is the quiet engine of almost every bubble, which is a number that only points up. When a figure keeps climbing and no outsider is allowed to test it, that is not optimism, that is a warning. Bre-X stock had traded for pennies on a small Canadian exchange. As the ounce count grew, the share price went vertical. In April of 1996, the stock listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange near $187 a share. In May of 1996, it peaked at $286.50. That gave a company with no working mine a value of more than $6 billion. Later, it listed on the NASDAQ in the United States, so American investors could pile in too. Ordinary people mortgaged homes and emptied savings to own a piece of the dream. Roughly 40,000 of them ended up holding the stock. The Ontario Teachers' Pension Plan, which invests for school teachers, put in around $100 million. A Quebec pension fund put in around $70 million, and an Ontario municipal fund around $45 million. These were not fools. They were professional money managers with analysts and lawyers. They bought because the assays looked real and everyone else was buying, which is exactly how crowds work. Meanwhile, the Indonesian government and well-connected local partners wanted their cut of the richest mine on Earth. Giant mining firms circled, hoping to partner with Bre-X and dig the treasure out. One of them was a large American company called Freeport-McMoRan. Freeport agreed to come in, and as part of the deal, it would drill its own holes to confirm the gold. And that, quietly, is the moment the story starts to end. Independent drilling is the one thing salting cannot survive. If someone else pulls fresh core from the ground and tests it under their own eyes, the truth comes out of the rock. Freeport began drilling holes right next to Bre-X's famous ones. On the 10th of March 1997, Freeport's due diligence came back with a devastating result. Their samples showed an insignificant amount of gold. Not a smaller fortune, not a disappointment, but essentially nothing worth mining. The two companies scheduled a meeting to face what the numbers meant. On the 19th of March 1997, Michael de Guzman boarded a helicopter to fly to the Busang site. Somewhere over the thick green canopy, he went out of the aircraft and fell into the jungle. His body was found 4 days later. Official reports ruled it a suicide, noting he was sick and under enormous pressure. Others have wondered aloud for decades whether the truth was stranger than that. What is not in doubt is the timing, which was days before the fraud he had run was about to be exposed. The man who held the samples was gone, and the samples were about to be tested by people he could not reach. The dream did not survive the man who dreamed it. Bre-X hired an independent firm, Strathcona Mineral Services, to investigate what had really happened at Busang. Strathcona ran a careful, closely watched drilling program and sent the core to labs on 3 continents. On the 4th of May 1997, its report landed like a hammer. The samples had been salted, the gold was foreign to the deposit, and there was no economic gold mine at Busang. Strathcona called it the biggest fraud in the history of mining. The stock, once $286.50, collapsed to about 6 cents. Roughly $6 billion of value evaporated because it had never been real in the first place. David Walsh, the founder, retreated to the Bahamas and died the following year. John Felderhoff, who had sold about $84 million of his own Bre-X stock, was charged with insider trading. After a trial that dragged on for years, he was acquitted, and no one was ever convicted for the fraud itself. 40,000 investors got almost nothing back. The richest gold mine in the world turned out to be a hole full of ordinary rock and river dust. Here is the lesson I want you to keep, and it is older than Borneo. When a valuation depends on a number only insiders can check, you are not investing, you are trusting. Bre-X had no revenue, no refined gold, and no independent audit of the one thing that mattered, which was the assays. Every serious buyer relied on samples controlled by the man with the most reasons to lie. So before you put money into any story, ask a plain question, which is, who checks the evidence, and can I trust that they are truly independent? If the answer is that only the promoter checks the promoter, walk away, no matter how good the story sounds. Real wealth is boring, verifiable, and slow, and it survives an outside auditor pulling a fresh core. If a story keeps getting richer while the proof stays locked in one man's hands, that is not a gold mine. That is a trap with better lighting. I'm Sterling, and if this saved you from one shiny lie, subscribe, because the next Busang is always being drilled somewhere, and I would rather you watch it from out here with me.